What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, February 5th Injury Report Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can find me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 9-game NBA slate today. Decent amount of injury news to get to, some trades that have gone through, and also, of course, the caveat that more trades are probably to come. The NBA trade deadline is tomorrow, so there is still some unexpected stuff that could happen between now and lock. But going to walk through the injury report as it stands at 1:30 p.m. Eastern and just talk through the questionable guys on the injury report, what the potential ramifications are if they sit. I know that it's a really important part of NBA DFS, being able to adjust quickly to news at times. And the more you prepare for that, the better an idea you have of how to react, the easier it becomes as you get close to lock and you start getting guys ruled out. Also, if you're just looking to get an idea of the slate, work on your lineups during the day, it helps to have that knowledge as well. So I'm going to just quickly walk through the injury report. Starting here at the top, nothing to talk about in game one. Nobody's questionable for the Cavs on the back-to-back. Nobody is questionable for the Pistons. For Milwaukee, it's a little bit messy. You can see Chris Middleton listed as probable. He is actually no longer on the Milwaukee Bucks. He was traded to Washington earlier today, so he will not be playing. Giannis is probable. Lillard is probable. Portis is expected back. Brook Lopez is questionable, and that was a midday downgrade with the knee injury as well. At the beginning of the day, Lopez was probable, and Giannis and Lillard were questionable. Those two were upgraded. Lopez was downgraded. There is also some chance that I think Brook Lopez ends up getting moved at the deadline. So if I had to guess right now, I would guess that Lopez ends up not playing. But this is also one of the first games on the slate. So you don't need to really make a guess. But if he does end up sitting, my expectation is that Bobby Portis, we would expect to play more. The only caveat there is keep in mind Bobby Portis did just miss a handful of games for personal reasons. So it's I don't know, what his conditioning level is. Maybe, hopefully, we'll get some sort of report on that before the game. Although even then, you should take that with a grain of salt, as Joel Embiid reminded us yesterday. But I would expect Bobby Portis to play certainly more than he would if Lopez is in, if Lopez misses this game. And then you probably also just see increased playing time for the wings, combination of guys, more minutes available for Gary Trent Jr., more minutes available for AJ Green, Pat Connaughton probably in the rotation. Andre Jackson probably plays a bit more. Taurean Prince probably plays a bit more. So it would mostly just open up a few extra minutes for a lot of guys, but I would expect Bobby Portis to be the primary beneficiary. If Lopez is out and Bobby Portis does not start, I would take that as a sign that Portis is going to be at least somewhat limited here as a result of being out for the last however many games. If Portis does start, I would assume he's playing enough minutes to be a pretty solid DFS play if Lopez ends up being out. If he's out, it also most likely does mean more minutes for Giannis at the 5, which is typically just more production, more fantasy production for Giannis. So that's good as well. For Charlotte, Vasa Micic is questionable. He was questionable last game and ended up playing. If he misses this one, I would expect more playing time for KJ Simpson. I would expect more playing time for Isaiah Wong. Simpson most likely would be the guy that you're looking to from a DFS standpoint. Also, I would expect more ball handling responsibilities for Miles Bridges, which would make him probably a better fantasy producer as well, just because he has the ball in his hands more. He can facilitate more, get more assists, and also call his number more often and get up more shots as well. For the Spurs, Chris Paul is questionable. There's already a huge question mark here as well, because this is the first game that the Spurs will have De'Aaron Fox available. So we already don't know what this rotation is actually going to look like. But if Chris Paul ends up missing this game, I think that it helps solidify minutes for Stephon Castle, who I'm expecting to still start, but probably play a few less minutes than he had been now that De'Aaron Fox is there. If Paul is out, I think you probably go back to Castle playing, 30 to 32 minutes as a starter. You would probably get increased playing time for a combination of Champagnie, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, the guys off the bench that are going to potentially see their workload cut into a little bit more with the addition of Fox. Those minutes, if Paul doesn't play, become available again. So I don't think that there's one huge ramification like there would have been prior to the De'Aaron Fox trade, and you would get, like Trey Jones stepping into the starting lineup or something. That's not the case anymore if Paul is out, but it will make some guys look marginally better on San Antonio. For Atlanta, nobody here is questionable. For Memphis, Brandon Clark, John Conchar, Marcus Smart, and Vince Williams are all questionable. So this is kind of two different things going on here with this team. Smart has been out Konchar's not really in the rotation. Vince Williams has been out. So if those guys end up missing, nothing changes. Nobody cares. But if Smart or Williams are available, that's just another body being added to the rotation for Memphis. Those are guys that I fully expect to be in the rotation. Marcus Smart for sure, and probably Vince Williams. Maybe they cut into Scottie Pippen. Maybe they kick Jake LaRavia completely out of the rotation. It's kind of up in the air exactly how Memphis handles that. If those guys end up coming back, it could affect Luke Kennard as well. But if those questionable guys end up being in, then they matter. If they end up being out, it doesn't matter at all. Brandon Clark is the opposite. I talked about it on this video the last time he was questionable, and he ended up being ruled out, and the industry did not react correctly. You were able to get Zach Edey at 2% owned, but if Brandon Clark is out, you should expect more playing time from Zach Edey. He played 25 minutes in that game against San Antonio without Clark. I would expect him to be in that 24 to 25-minute range typically if Clark is out. Now, one thing that could mess with that is if you get Clark out, but like Smart and Vince Williams in, then maybe Memphis continues to play Edey like 20 minutes and they just, use their wings. They play smaller, give Jaren Jackson more minutes at the 5. That is one way they could go. But I would say I'm pretty confident that if all of these questionable guys are out, that you should be expecting like mid-20s in minutes from Edey instead of low 20s. If the non-Clark, if the questionable wings are in and Clark is out, I still think there's a path to Edey playing mid-20s, but it is a little bit riskier just because we don't know exactly how Memphis is going to handle that rotation with the additional bodies. For Toronto, RJ Barrett out again, Jakob Poeltl out, Emmanuel Quickley out. Chris Boucher is questionable. This doesn't matter a ton, but it does matter a little bit. With Boucher out yesterday, we saw Jonathan Mogbo essentially take his role in the rotation. And then when Jakob Poeltl left the game, Orlando Robinson basically became the backup to Kelly Olynyk. So my expectation here is that Kelly Olynyk starts in place of Poeltl, and then Orlando Robinson is his backup. And if Chris Boucher is in, Chris Boucher just reclaims the normal Chris Boucher role where he's playing like 15 to 20 minutes off the bench, and Jonathan Mogbo just goes back to the bench. If Boucher is out, then I think you just get Mogbo playing like in that Chris Boucher role like he did yesterday. So I don't think there's huge fantasy implications here. There is the caveat that none of that is set in stone. Olynyk 1 doesn't have to start. Orlando Robinson doesn't have to be the backup. Like it could be Mogbo and Boucher instead of Robinson, Boucher, or whatever. But that's my expectation here is that, at least for right now, Olynyk starts in place of Poeltl, and then Robinson backs him up. And then the other backup big is Boucher if he's healthy or if he's in, and Mogbo if Boucher is out. That's my expectation there. Again, no huge DFS ramifications. The biggest is just that Poeltl is out, and that should open up Kelly Olynyk, assuming he starts, as a good value play. Nobody questionable for Miami. One thing I will note there rotationally, Duncan Robinson is listed as probable with a right hip contusion. I don't know if the hip is what contributed to yesterday, but Duncan Robinson only played 11 minutes despite starting that game on fire as well. Somebody like Duncan Robinson, typically they have volatile playing time, but if they're making their shots and they're playing well, they play a lot. So it was really surprising to only see him play 11 minutes yesterday. He started the first quarter, he started the third quarter, never came back in either half. So I don't know if that was injury related, but I am a little bit more scared of his minutes today than I was going into yesterday. Again, not that I'm super confident in that. It's just something I wanted to point out. For Philadelphia, this team remains a mess. No Joel Embiid today. Andre Drummond and Paul George are doubtful. Q tags on Eric Gordon, Quentin Grimes, and Kyle Lowry. So we should expect the starting lineup to be Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre, Yabusele, and Justin Edwards. And then if Eric Gordon is in, probably Eric Gordon. It could be Quentin Grimes if he is in. Basically, I expect the fifth starter to be one of Eric Gordon, Quentin Grimes, or Ricky Council. Council would be my guess if both Gordon and Grimes are out. Doesn't have to be the case, but that would be my guess. If Gordon or Grimes are in, I would expect one of them to be starting in that fifth spot. So the big fantasy implication here is if all these guys are in, it doesn't really matter that much. Like Tyrese Maxey is still going to look good regardless of these guys' statuses. He's going to play a lot. He's going to be the number one option here. Yabusele is going to play a lot. Justin Edwards will still play enough to where he's, like a secondary option. Kelly Oubre will play enough to where he's a secondary option. Where it really matters is that if like all of these guys were to be out, then you're back in that same situation that we had a couple of games ago for Philadelphia, where I believe you got 40 plus minutes from Oubre. Ricky Council almost triple doubled in his start. You got, a ton of minutes from Justin Edwards, who also played a lot of minutes yesterday. So it's basically a depth thing here where if these guys don't play, you're just going right back to Kelly Oubre basically not coming off the floor and Edwards and Council playing a ton, more so than you're talking about it being a usage impact on anybody, because none of these guys are high usage players. Nobody questionable for Washington. As a reminder, they do not have Kyle Kuzma anymore. Also do not have Patrick Baldwin. Not that that matters at all, but we will be getting a different rotation for the Wizards. For Brooklyn, Daron Sharp is questionable. I don't think this has a huge impact. Ben Simmons not on the injury report. The one thing that I would speculate on, and I think there's a decent chance of, is that Nick Claxton could end up playing a little bit more. I talk about this a lot on shows, but I think one of the spots that goes most overlooked in the industry is when the backup center is out. Often the starting center plays more. Now, in this case, we know Brooklyn does not give a shit. So they don't have to play Claxton more. They don't care about winning these games. They're playing really flat rotations where pretty much everybody plays like 22 to 30 minutes. But if Sharp is out, the Nets don't have like a true backup center. They have Ben Simmons, but they're without Noah Clowney. They would be without Sharp in this case. Trendon Watford is also out. He played 19 minutes yesterday. So you could see Claxton just get a couple extra minutes in an effort to just make the rotation easier to manage. So that is something that I would want to keep an eye on. I would probably project Claxton at least a little bit higher than I will if Sharp is in. Ben Simmons, I assume, would play most of the backup center minutes, for lack of a better phrase. Like I assume it would just be him. But yeah, so I don't think that there's any huge implication here. I expect Brooklyn to just run as deep a rotation as they can. They ran a 10-man rotation yesterday with no Simmons. They don't have Watford today, but I assume you'll get a 10-man rotation with Simmons. But then if Sharp is out, it probably becomes a 9-man rotation, because I think that might be all they have at that point. So it does matter a little bit, but there's no like one guy that I think ends up looking much better outside of a little bit of a bump for Claxton and then additional minutes for the wings. No Bulls injury report yet. Actually, I think it did come out. It's just not listed. Lonzo is out. I don't think there are any Q tags on it. Lonzo's out. Horton Tucker's out. I didn't see anybody questionable, but that is one that we'll have to wait until that's updated on the next injury report. Nobody questionable for Minnesota. Moses Moody is questionable for Golden State. Another one kind of similar to like the Nets and sort of like Chris Paul, where it matters as far as projecting minutes for Golden State. Moody played 24 minutes last game. He's been firmly in the rotation, but I don't think it matters as far as elevating any in particular Golden State player. We know that Steve Kerr's tendency is to run deep rotations. If somebody is out, he just adds another body to the rotation. You probably get, Santos in the rotation. You get maybe Kyle Anderson in the rotation if he's out of Steve Kerr's doghouse. Buddy Hield probably plays a little bit more than he would if Moses Moody were in. Pajemski maybe plays a little bit more. So it makes all of those guys look, slightly better, but there's no one guy that ends up looking great. Utah on the other side, Lauri Markkanen is questionable. This one is another one where you just get kind of, I think, small bumps for guys, because we know that Utah does run a pretty deep rotation. They are relatively healthy, but they are also missing Colin Sexton here. So if you take Sexton off the floor, you take Markkanen off the floor, you are looking at least small bumps in usage for Keontae George, for John Collins. Jordan Clarkson, mostly unaffected. He's just going to go look for his shot anyway. You would expect more playing time for Sensabaugh and probably Potter, maybe Mikhailuk if he were to get the start in place of Markkanen. So the fringe pieces as far as playing time goes, all up in the air with Utah. You never know what that starting lineup is going to look like. I think Mikhailuk probably would get the start, but again, it's Utah. But you would expect a little bit more offensive upside for guys like Keontae George and John Collins. Before we move on to the next game, as a reminder, did just want to remind you guys that the Showdown Sims tool at Run the Sims is free to use for the Super Bowl. So obviously, huge Showdown contest, Showdown slate. You can use this for free. If you missed on the news, those of us at Endgame Syndicate bought Run the Sims. This is a site that already has an existing good Showdown product. good NFL product. We have plans to improve that, add some other stuff to the site as well. But for right now, we are making the already existing Showdown Sims tool free to use for the Super Bowl. So go and check that out. Works like you would expect the Sims tool to do. But a couple things that I do think are really interesting that I really like. If you go to the inputs tab here, you actually can adjust very easily on the screen market shares, touchdown shares, all that type of stuff for players. So you're not reliant, you're not strictly held to, what the projections team thinks Xavier Worthy, how involved they think Xavier Worthy is going to be. If you think it's too low, you can very easily just change that and it will change the projection for you on the projections tab, as opposed to using sites where you're like, well, I think Xavier Worthy's too high, but I don't actually know how much to adjust this by without going, too far the other direction. You can adjust directly here, adjust the input, and it will change the projection the correct amount for you. You can do that with the score. If you think that Kansas City should be a 7-point favorite, you can make it so, and the simulation will use that assumption and give you those outputs. You can also use that if you're trying to build, different sets of lineups. So you can say, well, if the game is close, how do these guys project? What are the best lineups to play? If this game ends up being a 14-point Kansas City win, what were the best lineups to play, etc. You can do all that type of stuff here on the input screen. So I think that's really useful. You have the ability to set different lineup requirements. You can go into the advanced filters tab here, do all this kind of stuff to, make sure your lineups fit whatever criteria you want them to. You can disallow different positions at captain. You can force stacking rules if you want to. All that type of stuff is available for you. You can adjust the payout structure for the field that you're playing. You can choose the type of simulation that you want to use, whether you're having your lineups compete against each other or you're looking to exploit the field more by taking individual lineups and simulating them against a field that matches projected ownership. You can, if you want to, adjust how the lineups are graded themselves. You can see on a player-by-player basis what players are simulating out as the most profitable players to use, the least profitable. And then finally, of course, you can see your actual lineups, the expected value, how often it finishes in different percentiles, the salary used, the ownership used, the average sim result, how the predicted dupes, which is obviously really important for Showdown. So all that stuff is available for you for free at Run the Sims for the Super Bowl. Check that out. And if you like it, you're excited about it, sign up for Run the Sims. We have an annual package up, but sign up for any of the NFL packages. You will get 10% off using the promo code ENDGAME, and that 10% off, that price will be locked in for life as long as you are subscribed. So whatever we do in the future, whatever we end up adding to the football package, if we end up increasing the price down the road, whatever, you're locked into what you signed up for there using promo code ENDGAME and getting that 10% off. So check that out. Really excited to be a part of this. Really excited for what we're going to be able to do with this site. And we're starting out by offering the Showdown tool for free for you all to use for the huge Super Bowl contests. Now, getting back to the injury report, going to New Orleans at Denver, Daniel Tice is listed as questionable. He is 100% not playing because he is no longer on the Pelicans. He was traded to OKC right before I started recording this video. So what we actually saw last game with him out is one thing that was expected and one thing that wasn't. So Yves Missy's playing time has been very reliant on whether or not Zion Williamson is active so far this year. Because you get Zion closing halves at the 5. And when you had Daniel Tice, what was happening was, Misi would play his 24 minutes, we'll call it. Tice would get his backup minutes, and then you have Zion getting center minutes. Now you take Tice out of it, and Misi played 34 minutes in that last game while Williamson played his 28. So it wasn't a case of Williamson not playing full minutes or anything. Misi should just continue to play like upper 20s, low 30s now without Daniel Tice. But the thing that was actually really surprising is that Karlo Makovic played 27 minutes off the bench. Not only did he essentially back up Misi, he played minutes alongside Misi. He played minutes alongside Misi plus Williamson. I don't know if that's going to be something that the Pels continue to do, but you did see Makovic essentially just jump Jeremiah Robinson-Earl in the big rotation. Robinson-Earl played like 10 minutes in the first half, didn't even step on the floor in the second half. So I expect more minutes from Misi here without Tice. And then I think Makovic may just be playing himself into a pretty big role off the bench for this Pelicans team. The other thing that we saw, and this, isn't Q tag related, but I'll just mention it because I'm talking Pels rotation. Jordan Hawkins still only played like 14 minutes. Alvarado played 22. Javonte Green got the start. I don't know if that will continue to be the starting lineup or not. It could have just been, a matchup thing where the Nuggets did start Zeke Naji alongside Jokic, so you had a big front court there. Maybe, that's part of why the Pels ran the rotations that they did. But you saw the bulk of the minutes that were vacated by DeJounte Murray go to Matkovic more so than Alvarado or Hawkins. So again, I don't know if that'll change based on matchup, but it is just something interesting to note. And you do have that same matchup today. On the Denver side, Aaron Gordon is questionable. Westbrook and Watson remain out. So Gordon, I think the biggest impact really is just on Zeke Naji. Zeke Naji started last game in place of Gordon. He played 31 minutes. So we had seen Zeke Naji basically replace Peyton Watson when Watson went out and play like 24 minutes off the bench in the previous game. Then he moves into the starting lineup here and essentially just replaced Aaron Gordon, played 31 minutes, which is pretty much what Gordon plays when he's in. I don't think you start projecting Naji if Gordon is out for 31 minutes, but I think projecting upper 20s makes sense just based on the rotations generally that Denver's running and the way that they've been using Zeke Naji. Michael Porter Jr. also was talking very positively about changes that Zeke Naji has made as far as his approach, professionalism, stuff like that. The type of stuff, that you're never going to read too much into when you're trying to project minutes, but that you do like to hear when you're talking about somebody like Naji that has been given opportunity after opportunity over the last couple of years and just always plays himself out of the rotation. Maybe he did actually do some stuff, do some work behind the scenes that has allowed the team to trust him more and makes it a little bit more likely that he doesn't fumble this opportunity also. So if he is starting, I would expect him to be playing a pretty nice chunk of minutes. If Gordon is in, I think Naji just goes back to that low to mid 20s Peyton Watson role off the bench. And then the big thing here that is going to be the case whether Aaron Gordon is in or not, but becomes, I think, even more set in stone if Gordon is out, is that without Westbrook, without Watson, we're just seeing Michael Porter Jr. and Christian Braun play massive minutes as Denver has not gone deeper into their rotation as far as really adding bodies that are playing significant minutes. They've just said, okay, you guys were playing, 28, 30 minutes when Westbrook was in. Now you guys are just soaking up most of the Westbrook minutes, along with, Jalen Pickett being added to the rotation as Jamal Murray's straight backup. So I would expect to continue seeing huge minutes from Brown and Porter with or without Aaron Gordon. I think Gordon's biggest impact is on Zeke Naji's playing time. For the Suns, nobody questionable there. Nobody questionable for OKC or Orlando or Sacramento. So that wraps this one up. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to check out Run the Sims and sign up for any NFL product using promo code ENDGAME. I will be back at 4:50 p.m. Eastern talking DraftKings tournaments on this channel. So be sure to check that out. Have a good afternoon, and I'll see you back here later.